Hello, and welcome to part 2 of every rat I have ever owned. My cat is here. You're probably going to hear her screaming at me, but she's just a feature of the channel now. But yeah, let's just get right into it. I will do a couple of disclaimers again real quick. One being that a lot of these rats are still pet store rats, so a lot of them did not live very long. And another being that I will be discussing how they passed and the ages they were at, and if you're not in the mood to listen to that, that is fine, and you can click off. And also, I am going to be discussing their varieties and such, but I'm going to be using the American terms, so they might be considered something different in your country. Alright, so the first rat of this video is Sookie. Sookie was from PetSmart. She was a female rat, black-capped Dumbo, and she might have been a Rex. Her fur didn't really have the classic curl, but it was very rough in texture and longer and kind of stood up the way a lot of poor Rex coats do. So I'm guessing she was a Rex, but she didn't show it very well. Now, Sookie was a little older when I got her, probably closer to 10 weeks old. And that's because no one wanted her because she was a biter. At least that's what the employees told me. She never actually tried to bite me, but a lot of employees are taught to pick them up by the tail, so that might have been part of the problem. But yeah, she never tried to bite me. She wasn't a nipper. She was a chaos demon. She was such a hard rat to please. She didn't like anything with her cage. She didn't like any of her cage mates except Twitch, to the point that I actually had to separate her out with Twitch. She did not care for being contained. She was just a wild child. She was all over the place all the time. And she was just a really hard rat to keep happy. But she was also really fun. Like, I have pictures somewhere of her, probably on Cappy's phone, of her just climbing all over my face and trying to walk across my glasses. She wanted to be in everything. She loved new things. She was just such a high energy, fun-loving rat. And I do appreciate that about her, even though she sometimes gave me a headache. So Sookie lived to be about 1 year and 4 months old, and she was another one of my pet store rats that was fine and then got that respiratory issue and just declined so quickly and ended up passing away, I think about 2.5, 3 days after the issues started. It's just one of those things with the pet store rats I talked about in my last video, where they just don't do very well when they get like a respiratory issue. They just don't have the genetic strength to bounce back from it, basically. But she was a very sweet girl. She was very high energy, and I'm happy that I got her. Next up, we have Dresden. Now, Dresden was also from PetSmart. She was a female mink Dumbo, mink being a grayish blue color, and she was also a little bit of a wild child. She was an escape artist, to the point that Cappy called her Houdini for her entire life, and I'm pretty sure if I said Dresden, she would be confused which rat I was talking about. But yeah, she holds the record for the longest escape, because I actually don't know how long she escaped for. Basically, one day I came home and I was sitting at my desk reading, and all of my cats, and I think at the time I had 5 or 6, were gathered around me staring under my desk. And I finally looked down expecting to see like a lizard or a scorpion, and instead I saw a teeny tiny brown face peeking at me from behind my desk, and I was just like, oh no. And I hadn't been home all day, so I have no idea how long she was gone, or out of the cage for, I mean. And I ended up having to do a rescue mission, pulling my desk out from the wall, getting both my parents, and when I finally managed to grab her, because she made a run for it, basically, and I grabbed her knowing how it was going to end, and she bit me right between my knuckles. And this was over a decade ago, I think, and I still have the scar between my knuckles. She got me good. And she knew how to escape cages. She was so good at it. I had clips on every cage that she was in, because this was before I had a critter nation, because she was just so good at it. And she wasn't the most friendly rat. She wasn't very into me. She didn't really want to hang out or anything like that. This was during a period where I just was having a lot of trouble bonding with my rats. And she didn't dislike me. She just wasn't interested in giving me attention, which was fine. She was a very sweet girl, very energetic, as you can tell by her escape artist ways. The number of times I would have her in a small cage while I was cleaning her cage, her big cage, and I would hear a thunk, and I'd turn around to see that she had broken out. Like, she was she was so hard. But she was also a very good girl. She only lived to be about a little over a year old, I think. I think a year and 2 months old. She had a heart attack. I was there when it happened. I saw it happen. And based on what I know of rats, I'm pretty sure that she had a heart attack because it happened very suddenly. And it was not pleasant. I was watching Hell's Kitchen at the time, so anytime I hear the theme song, I just think of Dresden, which is fun. But yeah, so that's what happened with Dresden. She will always be remembered for the scar on my knuckles and for being the rat that could escape anything. Next up, we have Jekyll. Jekyll was a blue variegated Dumbo female that I got from PetSmart. She was just the sweetest little thing, honestly. She had, much like some of my other rats, she just did not have a mean bone in her entire body. She was very gentle, very sweet. She didn't cause any fights. She was a great contrast to her sister Dresden, in that she didn't cause trouble, so I didn't have to constantly worry about her escaping or biting me when I caught her. She was just a very good girl who didn't want to make waves or cause any trouble. She was the type of rat that just wanted to accept everyone, people and rats alike. She just wanted to cuddle puddle. She wanted to be like the mom of the group. She wanted to mediate. She was a very good girl in that regard. She was the kind of rat that people kind of think of when they want rats, because they see all these cuddly rats that are just, off doing their thing, but come back for cuddles and stuff. And not a lot of rats are actually like that, but, she was. I would say that she wasn't the most high energy. And I just remember so many of the times when Dresden was escaping the containment cage on my desk, I'd turn around and Jekyll would be watching her, but from the safety of the cage, which I did find funny. She never got sucked into her sister's antics. Unfortunately, I did not have Jekyll for very long. At about 10 months old, she developed a tumor that was inoperable, and it grew extremely fast. Typically, when a rat that young develops a tumor and it's that aggressive, it's going to just keep cropping up over and over again, and eventually you just can't do anything about it. And with her, it happened very quickly because it was inoperable to start with. But it was, in all likelihood, one of those rare malignant tumors that rats can sometimes get. So most mammary gland tumors are benign. Only some are malignant. And I do feel like this one was probably malignant due to how young she was and how aggressive it was. So yeah, she was only about 10 months old when she passed away. So I don't have very many memories of her, but she was a very, very sweet girl. Next up, we have Bones. Bones was a champagne-hooded female standard rat who I got from PetSmart. And she was my first experience with an aggressive rat. Now, at the time, I didn't know how to deal with aggressive rats the way I do now. If I had to do it all over again, I would have gotten her spayed the first sign of aggression the way I would with my current lot. And it probably would have made things a lot easier. Her main issue was food. A lot of people say rats cannot be food aggressive, but they absolutely can be food aggressive. It's not necessarily common in them the way it can be in dogs, but her issue was definitely food, which made feeding her, getting my hands in her cage, handing her food, all of that was very difficult because she was territorial over where the food was. This is one reason why you should scatter feed, because it can help alleviate some of that kind of behavior. But so Bones was mostly a hands-off rat for me because she was, as I said, aggressive. She would try to bite me. I remember I gave Cappy a piece of peach to give Bones, and Cappy got scared by how aggressively Bones came at her for it. Because even though she was a mean rat, I still wanted to give her the best. Unfortunately, I did not, because I did not get her spayed, but we learned from these mistakes. So rats do not need human interaction to be happy, so she didn't necessarily need me, but I do wish that I had taken care of her in the way that I would now. So she was, as I said, she was very moody, she was grumpy, she did not like people at all. Even if I had gotten her spayed, I don't think she would have turned into a sweet soppy rat, because even as a baby, she did not care for me. And typically aggression does not start in babyhood. It starts when they become adults around 6 months old. So I feel that was just kind of her personality, which is okay. I didn't need her to adore me. But she had issues getting along with other rats as well. She managed, but she was mean. She was definitely a mean one. That behavior could have definitely been curbed had I spayed her, had I known. At the time, the vet I had didn't even do spays, unfortunately. So I don't know what vet I could have gone to because there wasn't one near me. But I do wish I had known more because I could have found one. But Bones did make it to a decent age. She lived to be a little over 2 years old. She ended up getting a mammary gland tumor right next to her urethra. And the vet I had at the time, it's a very difficult surgery that close to the urethra, and a lot of vets won't even attempt it. And the vet I had at the time told me that it was just completely inoperable. And shortly after she got it, she started to bleed heavily from her vagina, which could have been pyometra, or the tumor could have grown inside and torn something. I'm not sure because of how heavily she was bleeding. I thought the kindest thing to do was let her go. So unfortunately, I do feel like I did not do right by Bones, but we all make mistakes, and the important thing is that we learn from them and use what we have learned to educate other people so that they do not make the same mistakes that we have made. So next we have Spooky. Spooky was a black-hooded Dumbo female rat that I got from PetSmart. Unfortunately, I did not have her for very long. In fact, I only had her for about 2 weeks before she passed away. Now, Spooky, she was a very confident rat. She was very sweet. She was very cuddly. She was obsessed with me. But there was something wrong with her. I could tell something wasn't right, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I kind of, now that I know a little bit more, wonder if she had something called hydrocephalus, which is basically fluid in the brain. She would have had to have a very minor case since her skull wasn't deformed or anything. You can see some rats that are born with it that have like major deformities, but her head wasn't quite the right shape. I don't have any pictures of it because I didn't have her for very long, but she was definitely smaller than all the other rats that were in the tank with her, and she didn't look quite right in the face and head. I don't know if that's what she had because again, she passed so young. I do know that I could tell she was just off, but she didn't make any respiratory noise. Her chest was clear. She didn't have trouble breathing or getting around. She was just kind of small and oddly shaped, and she just didn't act quite normal, but not in a sick way. So I was surprised when I came home from my brother's wedding and found her passed away at the bottom of the cage about 2 weeks after I got her. So while she was very young, I am happy that I had her because she was just the sweetest, most gentle little girl. Next up, we have the last of my pet store rats, which is Trick, who, as you can see, was Spooky's sister. So Trick was a black, I think she'd be considered like a poor variegated because she had like one spot on her back, but she wasn't hooded. So we'll say a black variegated female rat that I got from PetSmart. And Trick was very sweet. She wasn't the smartest rat that I've ever had. She didn't figure things out quickly. She didn't really know what to do with herself most of the time. She was very, she tried her best. She liked to nest a lot, so she would carry stuff around the cage all down to the bottom where she liked to build her nest. I don't know why. She didn't want any of the hides or anything. She just wanted to make a giant nest at the bottom and then push it all out of the bars. But that's what she did. She was also a big foodie, so she liked anything that I would give her, but she wasn't aggressive about it or anything. She was very kind and gentle. Probably because she wasn't very smart, honestly, but she was just very kind and gentle, and she would take the food very gratefully. She was a very good girl. It took me longer to bond with her because she was also very shy. She wanted attention, she wanted to cuddle, but she didn't know how to ask for it or if I was safe, and it took a while for her to realize that I was. It's unfortunate that Spooky passed so young because I feel like they would have been very similar and would have really enjoyed getting into mischief together if Spooky hadn't passed away at the time that she did. But Trick went on for quite a while. She lived to be a little over 2 years old. And then the same thing that happened with Bones happened with her, and that she got a tumor next to her urethra, and then she got another one on the other side of her urethra, and then she started bleeding heavily. So unfortunately, that is what ended up taking Trick. But she was a very sweet girl, and I am happy to have had her. Okay, so they were my last pet store rats, and at this point I was trying to source my rats more responsibly. Unfortunately, I didn't have any idea what I was doing or what I was looking for, but I did get my next rats from a breeder. In the United States, it's not always so cut and dry who's a backyard breeder, who's a reputable breeder. I'd say this breeder was more definitely middle ground. They could have been a lot worse. They did deeply care about their rats, but they did have a lot of red flags, including asking 0 questions and just knowing that you wanted rats was enough for them to give you rats. But they did do that. So I would definitely put them more in like the middle, like lower middle of quality of breeders. Thankfully, I only got 3 rats from them, and the first of those rats we're going to talk about is Ruffian. So Ruffian was a American blue variegated Dumbo female, and she was a very shy girl. She did not really want attention. She wasn't scared of me by any means. She just didn't want attention. She was a little bit more intimidated by humans, and she was much more comfortable with her sisters, who she was rowdy with. The 3 of them had just the biggest rough and tumble battles in their cage I've ever seen, without it being aggressive anyway. And they just went for it. She and Clover spent a lot of time vying for the alpha position. And so the thing with Ruffian is she had an issue with abscesses, which I'll talk about in a minute. But my vets recommended I separate her out, and this is before I knew that wasn't necessary. So I separated her out for the healing process, and when I put her back in, she just shot right down to the bottom, straight to Clover, and the 2 of them just immediately started battling it out again, because Ruffian was like, I haven't seen you in a while, and I need you to know that you are not in charge of me. And Clover was just like, haha, you're a fool. But yeah. So Ruffian, as I said, had issues with an abscess, specifically one. It was on the side of her neck. And when it first popped up, this was the first abscess I had ever dealt with. And it was huge. It was so big and so nasty. And I didn't know what it was. So I decided to take her to the vet. And the vet, before I got her there, it burst and drained. But it left just this huge, giant scab on the side of her neck. So I took her in anyway because I had no idea what was going on, and the vet explained it to me. But while we were there, the vet grabbed that scab without warning me and just ripped it off of Ruffian's neck, and poor Ruffian, it did not do her wonders with her fear of people or her intimidation of people. She screamed bloody murder and did mad rat dash all over the vet's office. I managed to grab her, and I remember just holding her and trying to comfort her while the vet looked at me like I was crazy. So that was fun. And unfortunately, her abscess kept coming back. And as is the case with these kinds of issues sometimes, it was eventually, when it came back, it was actually a tumor and not an abscess. So the tumor was probably brewing for quite a while because she got her first abscess before she was even a year old. And then she got 2 or 3 more afterward with about probably, I'd say, a month or 2 in between them. And then it came back as a tumor. And it was in the same exact spot. It grew quite large. And because of its location on the side of her neck, very close to her, it wasn't a Zimbal's gland tumor, but it was like right near where one would be. So it was very close to the ear, very close to the jawline, close to all the vitals in the throat. So I opted not to get it removed. So Ruffian lived to be about a year and a half old before I had to say goodbye to her due to this just very aggressive tumor. Along with Ruffian, I got Caper. Caper was a black masked female rat with a standard coat and top ears, and she was a sweetheart. She loved attention. She loved just hanging out. She was a very laid-back rat. So she got into scuffles with Clover and Ruffian, yes, but only like as a bystander getting drawn in, basically. They would attack, and she just happened to be there. But she was otherwise very laid back. She didn't really want to get involved in too much of that drama. She was very sweet. She was a mama's girl. She liked hanging out with me the most. And she was just very understated. Some rats are in your face and will be all over you, ready to destroy you for a piece of food. And some rats are more quiet in the background, and that was Caper. She didn't always come forth immediately. I had to make sure she got her treat. I'd have to seek her out, which was a nice contrast to Clover and Ruffian, who were just all about who was more dominant. But Caper, when she was roughly a year and 9 months old, she had her first stroke, and she lost a lot of mobility in her hind legs. Basically, the stroke kick-started hind leg degeneration, which can happen when a rat has a stroke. And their cage that I had them in no longer became suitable because I couldn't keep the shelving in, because Clover knew how to knock it all down, and she'd go out every night and just knock everything down. So I ended up getting my first critter nation, and I went straight for the double critter nation because it was on sale at the time. And I just remember Caper loved that cage so much. She was all over it. Clover protested its existence, but Caper used every inch of that cage. I had to keep all the shelving in the middle in for her safety, but she was just all over it. Anything I put in it, she was interested in. She wanted to see every inch of everything because she was very curious as well as being very sweet. And she was just the best little rat. Now, after her first stroke, she did recover somewhat of her mobility. But unfortunately, as is often the case with rats who have a stroke, she had a second stroke, and that one unfortunately took a much harder toll on her. She lost what little mobility she had managed to regain, and it got to the point where she couldn't even climb into the nest that Clover had built to cuddle with her. And so I decided to let her go because I thought it would be the kindest thing to do at that point. So Caper lived to be just a little over 2 years old, and by a little I mean like a couple of weeks over 2 years old. And she did not get to enjoy her cage for very long. She only had it for about 2 weeks, but they were some of the funnest 2 weeks that she had, and I'm happy that I could provide that for her. And I was happy that I got to have her because she was just a sweet little girl. Along with Caper and Ruffian, I got Clover. So Clover was a Russian blue Agouti Rex Dumbo, variegated, standard female. And she was the biggest pain in my butt. So the thing with Clover was that she hated me. And I don't mean like, oh, she was aggressive and I didn't know it. I mean, she hated me in particular. She loved Cappy. She'd cuddle Cappy like nobody's business. And even other people, as strangers, she liked more than me. Whereas if I reached into her cage, if I tried to touch her, she would try to bite me. So Clover was a very dominant rat. Like I said, she and Ruffian would have just so many battles for dominance, and they'd play together all the time. They were real roughhousers. And Clover, I think, was the alpha, even though Ruffian did try to take her spot many, many times. And she took her job very seriously. So while she never liked me and she never sought me out for attention the way she would with, say, Cappy, or I remember the first time I took her to the vet and I warned him that she could be nippy, she started cuddling him, and I just stood there like, what the actual hell? How could you? This betrayal is so deep. While that was the case, because she was so dominant and she took her job as alpha seriously, when Ruffian passed away, she really, really, really started to have problems with me. To the point where I had to trick her into going to a different corner of the cage so I could take Caper out in order to do health checks, because she was really defensive over Caper. The three of them were very, very tightly bonded, and after Ruffian passed, she and Caper became even more tightly bonded. Caper and Clover just were inseparable from that point, and I think she thought I was a threat because she didn't like me. So anytime I tried to reach in to take Caper out, she would get defensive. If she saw me trying to interact with Caper outside of the cage, she'd get defensive. And I couldn't really do anything about that because she, at that point, was quite old. And she also just didn't have issues with other people. So I didn't want to put her through a surgery just because she hated me in particular. So while she was a very dynamic rat. She was very sweet with other people, not me. She loved to nest. She didn't really like the critter nation, as I mentioned. She spent most of her time at the bottom of the cage, but she liked to nest. She liked to rearrange the cage, if you will. She was very particular about how her cage looked, and I just didn't want to put her through a surgery that really I didn't think would change anything, because it was just me. Which is why it didn't necessarily surprise me when, after Caper passed away, Clover fell into a very deep depression. And she stopped being as aggressive with me because of the depression. She'd still try to bite me if I tried to pet her, but I could reach into her cage, I could rearrange things again. She was much less defensive. She'd still let other people cuddle her as well, but she lost a lot of her will, I guess, to keep going. And I got her new companions, but she just didn't care for them in the same way. I only caught her trying to cuddle with them one time. And unfortunately, what happens a lot of time when rats fall into a depression like this, when they lose either their bonded cage mate or they're alone, is that her immune system became weakened. And she ended up developing a respiratory issue that I just could not resolve. And the vet at some point recommended that I let her go. At which point I did. She was 2 years and 4 months old at the time. So she had about 4 months without caper to pull herself out of that depression, and she just didn't have the will to do so. She just missed caper so much. So ultimately, even though she hated my guts, I adored her. I thought she was the cutest thing on the planet, and I also kind of thought it was funny she hated me so much because it was just so ridiculous, a rat hating me that much. Cappy also just adored her. She's one of Cappy's favorite rats of the ones I've had. And I do like that even after all these rats and all this time, Clover made it to the top of her list still. So that is nice, and I do like that. And I'm happy that I got to have her, because even though she was the biggest pain in the butt, she brought something new to my life every single day. Alright, that'll just about do it for part 2 of every rat I've ever owned. That covers up to when I started my Instagram. So from now on, we'll have a lot more videos and pictures of my rats, which you guys will hopefully enjoy. And speaking of enjoying, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you know what to do. All the fun stuff down below. And I will see you in the next one. Goodbye!